Modern warfare is extremely advanced. We talk about biological weapons, we talk about chemical weapons, we talk about electronic warfare. These days we are talking about 4th generation warfare. Arthashastra, though it's an old treatise, does have a mention of various techniques and methods that are still prevalent today, that are still being used in modern warfare. Did you know there's a terminology for Secret Service, SPG, mentioned in Arthashastra? Do you want to know what that is? Then check out this video fully. In this video today, we'll be making few comparisons between modern warfare and the techniques and methods mentioned in Arthashastra. If you like the videos that I'm making, do give a like and subscribe to my channel. Namaste everyone, welcome back to Zesty Nimbu. This is Srirekha. If you haven't checked out the first video in this series on Arthashastra, then I suggest you go to the link below in the description or above and check out that video. In the previous video, we have spoken about the basic principles of foreign policy, the different actors, the different types of kings. We have mentioned all these things. In today's video, let's start off by understanding what Kautilya said about war. Why were wars conducted? As the first thing. Second thing we'll see are the different actors with respect to the conqueror. So we'll see the different relationships between the conqueror and the various actors in this drama. The next thing that we'll see is the types of war. Actually, there is a mention of all these wars even today. So let's see that comparison as well. Now, what about planning a campaign? How did the kings of yore plan a campaign? And does that have any relevance to what is happening today? The next thing that we'll discuss is types of troops. What are the various types of troops that a king has to assemble for him to win a war? So let's discuss the first aspect, which is why war. Why wars were undertaken by kings of yore. Now, as we have seen in our previous video, there is a threefold duty for any king. That is Raksha, which is protection of the state from external aggression. Palana, or administration of law and order within the state. Third is Yogakshema, or safeguarding the welfare of the people. The prosperity of a state and its inhabitants cannot be maintained without acquiring a new territory. And how was that done? By a settlement of virgin lands. Second is by alliance. Third is by conquest. Now, if a king was content with the territory that he has, then he'll fall prey to the expansionist ideas of other kings in a political environment. And hence, the kings of that time always were on a lookout for acquiring new territory. And that is the reason why they either went to wars or they made alliances. Now, if we think logically, there were many players involved in those times. There were majorly two parties, a king and his enemy. As we have talked about the mandala theory, there were other players involved as well. Complete list of kings and their relationship to the conqueror is as mentioned. So the conqueror was called as Vijayagishu. He is the king or the conqueror. Aribhavi is antagonist. Shatrubhavi or Shatru is enemy. Mitra Bhavi is friend or ally. Arimitra is enemy's ally. Mitra Mitra is friend of the ally. Arimitra Mitra is enemy's ally's friend. So kings of that time had to look out for themselves not just from the front, an attack from the front, but also from the rear, from the sides. So they had to be ever vigilant. So the attack from the rear used to happen from an enemy called Parshnigraha, who is the enemy in the rear. Akranda. Akranda is the ally in the rear. Obviously, the king will have allies. Parshnigraha Asara is rare enemy's ally. Akranda Asara is rare ally's friend. Antardhi. Now, there is a king who is between the conqueror and the enemy, and that king is called Antardhi. He is actually a weak, intervening king. And then there is Udhasina, who is a neutral king, who is very powerful, and Madhyama is a middle king. So these are the various kings and their relationships to the conqueror. So we have seen in our circle of states the mandala theory of how there are various players. There's allies, there are enemies, then there are allies again. So the conqueror is encircled in all these directions from these people. So he has to watch out for the attack from the front, from his Shatru, and then the rear, which is Parshnigraha, and then on the flanks. So this is how the mandala theory is mentioned. So now the logical next step is to understand the different types of war. The first type of war is called Mantra Yuddha. Mantra Yuddha is war by council, which means the exercise of diplomacy. Basically, this applies to a king who finds himself in a weak position and considers it unwise to engage in battle. So can we apply this to the thought process of what is happening in geopolitical scenario today? This is a genuine technique used in modern warfare as well. Now there is Prakash Yuddha, the second war type, which is basically open warfare, where time and place are specified and a set piece battle is undertaken. That also we see in modern times, open warfare. The third is Kuta Yuddha. Kuta Yuddha is concealed warfare and refers primarily to psychological warfare, including instigation of treachery in the enemy camp. That also we see. We see the psychological warfare happening in modern times as well. Then we have Guda Yuddha, which is clandestine war, using covert means to achieve the objective without actually waging a battle, usually by assassinating the enemy. In Guda Yuddha, the king not only uses his own agents, but he also uses enemies' agents, double agents, tribal chiefs, vassal kings, allies. All these people are involved in clandestine warfare, which is Guda Yuddha. Don't we see all these things playing out in modern times as well, right? We see that happening in our geopolitical scenario. Isn't Arthashastra relevant to today's times as well? So once the war has been decided, there are certain factors which are involved in planning a campaign. So first is power. What is power? Counsel and correct judgment, might, that is the actual strength of fighting forces, and enthusiasm and energy. So these are the three things which come under the constituents of power. The second thing is the place of operations. So where is the war going to happen? The terrain, the place, the area, all these has to be decided. The time of military engagement. Is the time conducive to the conqueror who is going for war? If it is not conducive, then what is the point of going to a war and losing it? So these are the three most important things: the power, the time, and the place, which are to be taken into consideration before going into the next factor, which is the season for marching towards the battleground. Obviously, not all seasons are conducive for waging a war. If it is a cold season, the troops will become demoralized very easily. If it is too hot, again, the demoralization of the troops can happen. The food will not be available properly. If it's winter, then again, the food might not be available properly. So all these things have to be taken into consideration with respect to season. Then when to mobilize different types of forces. There are different types of forces that have to be mobilized. So when is that time? The possibility of revolts and rebellions in the rear. So obviously this is a very important thing to consider. If there is a revolt or a rebellion in your own ranks, what will you go do in the war? If your own house is not in order, what will you do by going to a war? So this kind of revolt or rebellion has to be quelled, has to be nipped in the bud before you can engage in any war. Now the likely losses, expenses and gains. The king of that time also had to take into consideration, a war obviously will be heavy on the pockets. You will incur losses. There might be gains if you win the war, but you will be incurring losses. There will be expenses. You need to pay for the food. You need to pay the salary of the troops. You need to pay for the movement of the troops. All these things have to be taken care of. The expenses and the likely dangers. The kings also had to think of the dangers that would be involved with respect to various factors, be it the terrain, be it the weather, be it the revolts. All these things, the likely dangers have to be taken into consideration. So these are the various factors which were considered by the kings for planning a campaign. And if on balance, after giving due weight to the different factors, if the conqueror is superior to his enemy, then the campaign shall be undertaken. Otherwise, the campaign would be stopped, the war might not happen, and there would be different ways of dealing with the enemy. Probably an alliance might be considered, or there would be envoys sent to work out peace between these two parties, and so on and so forth. So these are the factors, and these are very important factors for planning a campaign. What are the different types of troops involved in any war? So as I've mentioned in the initial part of the video about a special term for Secret Service and SPG and NSG, that term is called Antaravamshika Sainya, which is King's Own Guards. So this is a special type of force which was raised to protect the king, and this force was never disbanded. So the other types of troops could be disbanded and the particular soldiers would be settled in various parts of the state, but this Antaravamshika Sainya was never disbanded. They are troops who are very loyal to the king. That's why it's called the King's Guard. So we have a movie, Kingsmen, right? So we have Secret Service, we have SPG, NSG, all these people protect the king from very close quarters. So that is the term which is used, and Arthashastra already had all these things. So now let's see the different types of troops. So there is a description of the types of troops which were used during Arthashastra time, and that expression is Maula, Bhrita, Shreni, Mitra, Amitra, Atavi. So these are the various terms which have been used. So Maula is basically, the root word is Mula, is regular standing army, which is composed of natives of that country, dependent on the king and sharing his interests and constantly trained. They are loyal to the royal family. So this is the standing army, which is Maula. And then Bhrita. Bhrita is the territorial army. So in modern warfare also we have a regular army, the regular armed forces of any country. Then we have territorial army. So in Indian army also there is a territorial army which comprises of citizens of the country and which are again raised from the natives of the country for a particular campaign and can be easily mobilized. And they are also obedient. And the third is Shreni, which are organized militia. So native militias acting as a group having the same interest as a king. The fourth one is Mitra, who are friendly troops, those of an ally or those hired or bought from other kings under a treaty. Amitra, who are basically alien forces who happen to fight with the king for their own reasons. Similarly, Atavi, who are jungle tribal forces commanded by their own chiefs. So what we have to understand is the first three, which are Maula, Bhrita, Shreni, are to be mobilized first. They are the ones to be dependent upon. So Mitra forces are the forces which have similar interest to the king, but they are available because of an alliance, not because of their own will. So alien troops and the Atavi troops, who are the tribal forces, have plunder as their only objective, and hence they are not to be dependent upon. As a king, he has to be dependent on the troops Maula, Bhrita, Shreni, and then come Mitra, Amitra and Atavi. So this is the types of troops mentioned in Arthashastra. So these are all present in modern warfare as well. Let's end the video here. We'll discuss the organization structure of the armies and who are present in the army. We'll see the weapons of mass destruction, the battle formations, all these things we'll see in our next video. So I hope you have liked and enjoyed today's video. If you have, do like, comment and subscribe to the channel, and do share these videos of mine with others as well. So the question for the day is, I've asked in our previous video also, what do you see these types of similarities that are happening in today's geopolitical scenario, and that mentioned in Arthashastra. I'm sure all of us will have different thought process. So if you do have any thoughts, just put it in the comment section. Let's read. It'll be interesting to see the various perspectives involved. So I'll see you in the next video. Until then, namaste.